It's been nearly 16 years since Final Fantasy XIV exists, and now the 6th expansion is upon us. As a big fan of this since its release, even if I took break time to time, I thought it was maybe time for me to do lore video of this universe. And so in today's video, it's gonna be the first episode of Final Fantasy XIV lore series. We will start with the beginning of the world, with the ancient, and the multiple calamity that preceded, such as the Allagan Empire and the War of Magi. Be warned though, it's gonna be a long video. Hope you enjoy. A long time ago, there was a beautiful planet called Etheirys. It was inhabited by beings who could freely use the Aether for creation magic. With this ability, they accomplished wondrous feats and built utopian cities. This included Elpis, a research facility dedicated to the creation and study of new life form, and Amaurot, the center of the civilization, and home to the Convocation of 14. These were the ruler, charged with maintaining order. One of the ancient Hermes, also known as Daniel, a great scientist, came to question mankind's single-minded pursuit of perfection. As a result, he conducted research on dynamics to create a species that could explore other worlds in the universe and find meaning in life by asking other civilizations. After years of research, he finally succeeded in creating a race with both the characteristics of a bird and those of a human. They were called the Magi, and were able to share consciousness like a hive mind. Hermes then sent them beyond the star. They could begin their exploration of the universe in search of intelligent civilization. Only Meteon stayed by Hermes' side to report the finding of her sister. Even though the first report he received from them were not particularly positive, Hermes believed he would someday receive a hopeful answer. One day Hermes was approached by two members of the Convocation, himself and Lla, who wanted to invite him to become a new member and inherit his former master's seat, Daniel. Reluctant to accept, he asked for some time to think and decided to show the party the research he was conducting in Elpis. Meanwhile, Meteon was overwhelmed by the voice of her sisters. They all say that their journey had led them to believe that life was suffering, and they had resolved to end it. When Hermes learned that his creation had concluded that salvation lay only in death, he transformed himself and fled with Meteon. Realizing the danger this could pose, himself, Lla, and Vena tried to stop him. Wanting time to think alone, Hermes went to the highest layer of the facility. He released the specimen to delay himself, party from reaching him. After being defeated, Hermes listened to the result of Meteon's report and his creation, declaration that it would bring an end to all life. Madness overtook Hermes, then he helped Meteon escape the planet, continue their plan. Hermes then used a device to wipe all memory of the recent events from himself and those present. Only Venat managed to escape and retain her memories of what was to come. Unaware of the truth, the other recruited Hermes into the convocation, and thus he doomed his people in the entire world. Some months later, from the far end of the universe, Meteon and her sister began singing the Song of Oblivion, which stagnated Etheirys' Aether. This resulted in a natural disaster that warped the ancient creation, magic. Unspeakable horror began to manifest from people's subconscious fears. The ancient did not know how to contain the chaos, but they placed their faith in the convocation. Others simply surrendered to their dread and despair, further fueling the disaster. The convocation knew that this calamity would consume their world and leave it lifeless if they did nothing. And so they devised a plan to summon an entity known as Zodiac. As a primal of darkness, he was about to quell the disturbed Aether. Summoning him, however, required the sacrifice of half the population. Some members, such as Azym, refused to participate in this slaughter and left the convocation. Those who accepted the cost-selected sum of their people to be sacrificed, and among them one known as Elidibus, offered himself as Zodiac core. Thus began the summoning, and once it succeeded, the final days were out through the creation of a barrier that kept Meteon's song away from the planet. It was, however, only a temporary solution, as the calamity had ravaged much of the world. To restore it, the convocation decided once again to sacrifice another half of their remaining population to return life to the planet. Then they called upon Zodiac a third time to harvest life from the new life form that emerged across the world. All of this was done to bring back those who had sacrificed themselves and now rested within the deity. Conflict soon arose among the ancient. Those who opposed the convocation plan assembled a rebel faction, with Venat as their leader. This brought disorder during the summoning, and so Elidibus had no choice but to withdraw from Zodiac to aid the convocation in restoring order. Put an end to Zodiac madness, Venat had no choice but to sacrifice her follower and become the primal Eidolon. With her newfound power, they attempted to subjugate Zodiac, so she could buy time until found a way to stop the Metea permanently. Thus began a ceaseless battle between the two elder primal, until Eidolon managed to use all of her power to shatter Zodiac into fragments. This split the world and every living being upon it into 13 shards and the source. As for Zodiac, now fragmented, he was sealed within a new silver moon. There, Eidolon created the low turret to serve humanity in case the seal was broken or the primal himself was destroyed. The moon would then serve as a starship to ferry people across the cosmos in search of a new home, so the final days failed to be averted. As for Amaurot, all that remained of the ancient civilization was destroyed, while the soul of the living were similarly split into 14 pieces across a fragmented world. The survivor of this event would eventually developed into the world's current race. Only 3 ancients survived the Sundering, with their soul intact: Elidibus, Labria, and him itself. Together they found the ancient cult, and the goal was to orchestrate unbrought calamity cataclysm, designed to gradually merge the source and all reflection back into one world. This will also revive Zodiac for his prison. During that era, a calamity of wings ravaged the world, using the soul remnant of her friends and colleague Idolin created the 12 to serve as caretaker of the source. They then took residence in the land later known as Erosia. With a Mughal as their servant, the 12 ruled over the land for centuries. However, when the wandering tribe of mortal race, the Elysian Mikode, Lalafell, Wog, Gadim, and Ear arrived, they were impressed by their resourcefulness and resilience. Each pair among the 12 commanded one of the 6 elements, and each was associated with a month of the Erosian calendar. Each elemental pair was also tied to one of the 6 constellations, visible in the source night sky. Eventually, the 12 ceded the land to mortals, with some becoming patron deities, and so the age of the gods came to an end. The arrival of mortal also caused conflict among the loyal servants, the Mughal of the Churching Mist. Some wished to descend to the surface, while others refused. Nevertheless, the Mughal king led his subject in secret to the realm of mortal, in search of a peaceful life. However, the distance to the land below was too great for their wings, so they decided to use the longest rope ever made. The king's subjects successfully slid their way to the promised land, except for God King Mughal Mog X11, who lacked the means to lower it himself. Mourning their lost king, and touched by his sacrifice, the Mughal abstained from naming a successor, and instead began to revere his name. Some remained in the Churching Mist, while others settled in Gridania. Meanwhile, a denizen of a distant planet escaped the destruction of his world with his last 7 eggs. Having no chance of surviving against Omega, the ultimate weapon that invaded his home, he had no choice but to flee. His name was Mega Storm, and after a long journey through the cold void of space, he arrived on Etheirys and forged a pact with Idolin. There he established himself at Silver Tear's Fall, and was charged by Alptic with Nemea of the 12 with overseeing the waters and magic of the world. Its egg eventually hatched, and each of its children went their separate way. Paimon and Tiamat made their home in Mirakilia, while Arsville, Nidog, and Matatusker took residence in Erosera. Azys became the caretaker of Vitra eggs until it hatched, after which Vitra established himself in Tabnair, in the near east of Ilzabar. And so the dragon race was reborn. During this same period, mortal civilization began to evolve through the invention of tools. Village and towns soon grew into kingdoms, as basic science and metallurgy developed tools increasingly gave way to weapons, causing the age to descend into blood-stained conflict. War erupted between kingdoms, but despite this, mankind thrived, and their number continued to grow with each passing generation. As the mortal race expanded, forests were felled to build homes, fields were planted to feed the growing population, mountains were carved apart to forge weapons, and the sky grew dark with industry. As the balance of the world tipped, a volcano erupted, casting the land into darkness. Massive thunderstorm followed, razing the world. This marked the beginning of the Second Umbral Era. Mankind fled into caves, where pestilence and plague further reduced their number. In their desperation, they began to pray, giving birth to the first form of magic. Thus began the Age of Prayer. Theocracy replaced the kingdom of old. The art of painting and goldsmithing flourished. Stonemasonry advanced rapidly, and the secret of steel was discovered. However, with the rise of religion came renewed conflict. Nations once again waged war against one another, and witch hunt spread throughout the land. With few left unattended, those who did not march to war were left to starve. During this age of conflict, the calamity of fire struck the world. The sun grew larger, scorching the earth. Hills and forests were reduced to dust, choked wasteland, causing famine and draining the life of all creation. In the aftermath of this disaster, a new age began, with the rise of a grand empire, the Allagan Empire. The ancient Azys made his first move and, under the name him itself, began assisting a man named Xande in establishing the Allagan Empire in Eorzea. Xande conquered much of the New World, save for Mirakita, but died not long afterward. His empire, however, lived on. The ancient taught the Allagan how to bind Primal, the physical world, and thanks to the discovery of Magi, an advanced machine from distant world, they learned the art of heterochemistry. Once the Allagan mastered it, they gained the ability to bioengineer chimera and other biological weapons, including the Ultima weapon, which was created specifically to combat Primal. At this point, the Allagan had reached the pinnacle of science and magitech, even developing space flight. They also built the Circus Tower, as both a symbol of prosperity and the seat of Allagan power, drawing upon solar energy to fuel their civilization. With their technology, the Allagan Empire spread across the world. It stood at the height of its power, with an innumerable population and many races under its rule. However, a century later, the Allagan civilization began to decline, becoming a shell of its former self. Lacking strong leadership and made complacent by post-currency society, it stagnated. It was then that a technologist and magician named Amon discovered a way to restore prosperity. He sought to revive Xande by cloning his descendant, who would eventually imbue their clone with their will. The reborn Xande provided the Empire with an eternal ruler, and with his return, The Allagan regained their former glory. Yet Xande remained dissatisfied. The fact that he had failed to conquer all of Etheirys during his first life continued to haunt him. Thus he began consorting with the Ancient and the World of Darkness in search of greater power. The Crystal Tower, however, lacked the energy required to maintain a stable portal to the void. To solve this problem, Xande sought a powerful source of energy and launched an invasion of Magi, the homeland of the dragons. During the invasion, Bahamut fell in battle, and countless dragons were captured. The Ancient then tempted his mate, Tiamat, with the promise of bringing her beloved back. Desperate, she agreed, and summoned Bahamut as a primal. She soon realized, however, that it was merely a vengeful shade bearing his likeness. Meanwhile, the people of Magi called forth the warring triad in a desperate attempt to defend their homeland. Unfortunately, the Ancient revealed to Xande the means of binding Primal, allowing the Allagan to capture the warring triad. The three Primal were sealed away within Azys Lla and used as key component in an engine known as the centrifugal crystal engine. With the aid of Omega, Xande defeated the primal Bahamut and imprisoned him within an artificial satellite known as Dalamoon. Using this immense energy generated by his captive, he was finally able to maintain a stable portal to the void. The Allagan then used imprisoned dragons in a state of perpetual torment to repeatedly summon Bahamut within Dalamoon. Tiamat was taken to Azys Lla, where she would suffer a similar fate. Thus the conquest of Enraptured ended with the Allagan Empire victorious. With the portal now open, Xande forged a dark covenant with a powerful void scent known as the Cloud of Darkness. Fearful that all his accomplishments will eventually fade with his death, he concluded that there should be nothing after death but darkness itself. Him itself recognized that this would inevitably lead to a calamity. As a result, he restored the memory of Fandaniel, the reborn Hermes, and awakened him to his true identity as a nation. He then convinced Fandaniel to place a clone of himself within the Crystal Tower. Meanwhile, Xande's conquest and the renewed expansion of the Allagan Empire began to foster unrest throughout the realm. Numerous uprisings erupted, and even some of his closest supporters turned against him. Among them were Yune and Oga, who had originally supported Xande's resurrection and conquest of Magi. However, once they learned of his true intention, and witnesses the atrocities he had committed, they realized they could no longer stand by. In preparation for the possibility of failure, they transferred their soul into several clones. These clones inherited their memories and became singularly devoted to stopping Xande. As more citizens learned of Xande's plan, a growing number of Allagan followers the example, creating contingency to oppose him. In a desperate attempt to suppress the rebellion, Xande sought to transport the full power of Dalamun into the Crystal Tower and complete its pact with the Cloud of Darkness. The immense surge of energy will tear open a permanent rift to the void. However, the tower could not withstand such power. The resulting catastrophe triggered a massive earthquake that devastated much of the Allagan Empire. The Crystal Tower sank into the earth, while a clone of Ammon placed both the tower and its occupant into stasis. This disaster was exactly what the Ashen had intended from the very beginning. In the aftermath, Vandanian fully embraced Xande's nihilistic ideals, though he outwardly continued to support the Ashen goal of restoring Etheirys to its original form. He secretly intended to seize the opportunity one day to finish what Xande had started. Thus began the Fourth Umbral era. After the Great Earthquake, the Allagan Empire was completely destroyed. The civilization rapidly disintegrated, with much of its knowledge scattered or lost. Only Azys Lla remained in the sky and continued to function. As for Dalamun, it's remaining into orbit for millennia. Later generations came to know it as the Lesser Moon, or Menfina Royal Owl, due to its proximity to the moon. With the fall of Allied technology, regressed to a pre-Allagan state, and the surviving race began to rebuild. At some point, a severe glaciation occurred that became known as the Age of Endless Frost. During this time, the Mikote, descendant of Allagan slave, crossed the frozen sea and arrived in Eorzea. This difficult era nearly wiped out the Lalafell or Alaroa Island. To escape this fate, they used an artifact known as the Key to open a portal to another reflection of the source, where they came to be known as the Milala. Another group of Lalafell arrived on their island years later, but did not remain for long, eventually migrating to Vilbrand in Eorzea. There they found the nation of Nim. As the Eorzean discovered the existence of magic, the military was strengthened by scholars capable of summoning fairies. This enabled them to defend their land against increasingly dangerous foes. The Nimian chose Ocean the Wanderer as their patron deity and built the Wanderer Palace in the mountain in his honor. An identical structure was also built along the shore to receive the sacred wing that flowed down from the mountain. Meanwhile, a talented thaumaturge named Shadowdo used a spell Meteor to call down a star containing dark matter. Through its discovery, he mastered the art of black magic. With this newfound power, the nation of Magi was found in Yafim. It quickly became a dominant power, thanks to his Void Mage, who could command Voidsent. Meanwhile, within the Black Shroud, the Sanctum of the 12 was constructed, and the people of the forest began practicing white magic. They eventually found the kingdom of Amdapor, which flourished throughout the region. Amdapor's mastery of white magic was developed specifically to counter the Black Mage of Mach. Seeing this as a threat, Mach declared war, not only on Endwalker, but also on Nim. Thus began a conflict that would eventually lead to one of the greatest calamities in history, the War of the Magi. When war was declared, the Void Mage of Mach began summoning increasing number of Void Sent to attack their enemies. To ensure that none of these creatures turned against them, the Void Mage developed a stone capable of obliterating Void Sent. This artifact was kept within a great pyramid in the city proper. Their first target was the nation of Nim. The Magi summoned a powerful Void Sent named Betelgeuse and sealed him within an ampoule. They then tricked a Nimian sea galley into transporting the ampoule back to Nim. Once unleashed, Betelgeuse spread a mysterious plague known as the Green Death, transforming the Nimian into tomberries. Many of the afflicted were quarantined within the Wanderer Palace, where they remained for centuries. To make matters worse, Mach also created an entity known as Ozma, which attacked the city and left much of it in ruins. The second target was Endwalker, as Mach sought to eradicate white magic once and for all. To achieve this, they decided to summon one of the greatest Void Sent from the 13, the Aboros. The High Void Mage Cesare opposed the summoning, fearing that the Aboros would be impossible to control. Unfortunately, she was branded a traitor and imprisoned when she attempted to stop the ritual. Once summoned, the Aboros provide Mach with the means to summon and imprison countless Void Sent, including their leader, Katsach, the Shadow Queen, who we hope to use in the future to gain even more power. With an army of Void Sent at his command, alongside the Aboros and his servant Ferdiard, the Magi launched a full assault on Endwalker. To defend themselves, the White Mage created powerful stone golem, infused with light aspect magic. Despite commanding a vast army, the Aboros was ultimately defeated by the White Mage. He and his forces were sealed away within the city of Endwalker and Endwalker Keep. With this defeat, Mach effectively lost the war. Unfortunately, the excessive use of magic during the conflict disrupted the balance of Aether, forcing water-aspected Aether to dominate the world. This imbalance invoked the wrath of Elemental, who summoned a powerful Elemental known as Oasok. Determined to end the conflict, Oasok sought to wipe out all the warring nation by unleashing a great flood upon the world. The flood reduced all three nations to ruins. When the Void Mage learned of the coming calamity, they constructed a massive ark capable of taking to the sky. With thousands of imprisoned Void Sent aboard, including Katsach herself, they possessed enough power to make the vessel fly. However, the presence of the Shadow Queen ultimately proved to be Mach's downfall. Rampaging Voidsent broke free of the confinement, forcing 50 Void Mage to sacrifice himself in order to reseal them. The Ark then vanished into the sky. The null stone was left within it, heavily walled tomb, in the hope that the rising floodwater would prevent any Voidsent from reaching it. All of this remained under the watchful eyes of Caesar Familio, Kate said, who ensured that the vessel would remain undisturbed. Meanwhile, a Reorganim scholar constructed a great magical ark to save as many Eurasians as possible from the flood. It transported them to an uninhabited island in the old world, where he found Allagan. Another man, Golbas Rombas, saved his people with the aid of a powerful grimoire. This brought the surviving Nemean back to the land of their ancestor, Allagan Island. Survivors from both Endwalker and Magi also settled there, and eventually learned to coexist. Thus came the end of the Sixth Umbral era. In the aftermath, the secret of void magic were lost alongside the Magi. Both white and black magic became forbidden art. Only the Pagel, chosen by the elemental, were permitted to wield the full power of white magic. They could in turn grant a select few the ability to wield a fraction of that power as white mage under the guidance. So that's all the lore of the 6th Umbral era and the 5 Astral era. There are still many events to tell before the journey of the Warrior of Light, but it's better to tell the rest in another video. Anyway, that was the first episode of my Final Fantasy XIV lore video, and I hope you like it. Now I want to know, what events look like it the most among those I told? The Allagan Empire, War of the Magi, or the Ancient Era? Please leave a comment. If you want to see my other lore video, I'm going some about Genshin Impact, the Trail series, and the Zelda series. I also do theory speculation, game trivia short, and if you're looking for soundtrack of those games I mentioned, you can find some on my channel. If you desire to watch my gaming on livestream, you can visit Pandragon Gaming channel. Thanks for watching, and may the Warrior of Light watch over you. Pandragons offline.